It started with headlights and shouting, then chaos erupted. People ran in every direction, and moments later, someone was found motionless beside a car door as tires screeched into the night. He was only 21 and had only been 21 for 21 days. What happened in those 20 minutes after he pulled up to that hookah lounge in Harbor City? How did a high school basketball legend from the South Bay end up in the middle of a dangerous situation, without warning, without support, and with no way out? His name was lled. He was Samoan, a hooper, a family man, and depending on who you ask, somebody who was never supposed to be in that neighborhood at all. Before that March night in 2014, lled was just a kid from Torrance who grew up between church food drives, backyard barbecues, and that loud, proud kind of family only island folks can really understand. He was born on February 12, 1993 in Los Angeles, but his roots ran deep in the Pacific. His parents, Filippo and lled, were part of the larger Samoan wave that touched down in California back in the mid-50s and 60s, chasing factory jobs, better schools, and a shot at something more stable than what the islands could offer. They landed in South Bay along with hundreds of other families like theirs and settled in Torrance, a quiet working-class city stuck between the busy streets of Carson and the longshore grind of Harbor City. If you grew up in the South Bay, then you already know what that means. One side is warehouses and freeways, the other side is flag colors and gang beefs that go back generations. But inside the lled house, life was different. Sundays meant big cookouts and bigger crowds. Cousins, uncles, church aunties, and neighbors would pack into their backyard just to eat, laugh, and trade stories about back home. Samoan culture doesn't play when it comes to family, and lled grew up on that heavy dose of love and structure where you called every grown person uncle, even if they weren't related, and every younger kid was your responsibility. Still, no matter how strong the home is, the streets outside don't always care. Harbor City was just around the corner, and in areas like that, even kids trying to stay out of trouble picked up on the unspoken rules early: who you were with, where you belonged, and when to stay quiet if the wrong people started asking questions. lled was a South Bay kid through and through, but being Samoan in Carson, Wilmington, or Harbor City came with baggage, especially when neighborhood rivalries had long histories and invisible lines you didn't dare cross. For a lot of kids growing up in that in-between space, the church, the street, and the court all existed on the same block, and figuring out which one kept you safe wasn't always simple. lled was the type of kid who turned everything into a game, whether it was who could run to the corner store the fastest or who could pull off the smoothest dance move at the family barbecue, and that competitive energy showed up early and never really left. He had this wild energy at home, always throwing himself into backyard ball games with his cousins, challenging his big brother just to prove a point, and running drills on cracked pavement like it was Staples Center. By the time he got to Narbonne High School in Harbor City, that energy had grown with him. He hit a growth spurt that took him from 5'9" to 6'3", and all that coordination, court vision, and speed finally had the height to match. At Narbonne, Coach Anthony Hilliard saw something early. He wasn't flashy, but he read the floor like a grown man. And when he took over the point guard spot during his sophomore year, everything clicked. lled became the floor general, the kind of player who didn't yell, but still made everyone move the right way. He broke presses with slick passes, used hesitation dribbles to freeze defenders, and always made the extra play to keep his team ahead. In the 2010 to 2011 season, he led the Narbonne Gauchos through a crazy playoff run, and when they beat University High 74-56 in March, they locked in the school's first Division II Los Angeles City section title in 10 years. lled averaged about 15 points and 7 assists per game that season, and even though he had the handles to cook defenders, he was never that me-first player. He ran the team like it was chess, not checkers. He got named Division II Player of the Year across the whole city section, and CBS Sports even highlighted him in their high school coverage. He started getting real interest from colleges across California, including some low-key Division I programs. After the championship game, when the reporters swarmed the court, all he said was, "We just all played hard, man. This trophy's everybody's, not just mine." That's the kind of guy he was. When fall came around later that year, lled packed up for Fresno City College, a 2-year program known for flipping raw talent into polished prospects, and he joined a squad that was always in the hunt for state titles. He put in solid work his freshman year, reportedly putting up double digits in scoring and holding his own against top junior college guards, and his game stayed consistent even with tougher competition, but something else was pulling at him underneath it all. Juggling practice, travel, and classwork without a full support system got heavy, and his grades started slipping. Fresno wasn't like Narbonne, where his coaches doubled as mentors, and his family was right down the street. Back home in Torrance, his parents could sense it too, and when he came home after just 1 year, they didn't press him too hard. They just asked what he wanted to do next. Shaylo floated the idea of enrolling at LA Harbor College, which had a decent athletics program and would keep him close to home, but something inside him had shifted. Maybe the fire dimmed a bit, or maybe the system just didn't make room for kids like him to figure things out slowly. So he stayed home, and for the first time in years, there wasn't a coach waiting for him after school or a locker room full of teammates pushing him every day. He had time, but not a lot of direction. That's when the worry crept in. His parents, especially his moms, noticed he was staying out later, hanging with a different set of folks, and while they trusted him, they knew what kind of temptations were waiting out there in Harbor City after dark. The game had always been his structure, his shield, his plan, but now that the lights had faded, the streets had more space to slide in. Even though Shaylo wasn't involved in any gang activity and had no criminal record or history of trouble, just being around the wrong crowd could still be seen as association in the eyes of the streets. And when you're a young Samoan from places like Carson or Torrance, people start making assumptions about your affiliations before you even say a word. In Los Angeles, Samoan gangs been active since the mid-'80s, with sets like Sons of Samoa coming out of Long Beach rolling with the Crips, and Carson Westside Piru repping the blood side heavy, mostly made up of Samoan or Polynesian kids trying to hold their ground in neighborhoods where size and loyalty mattered just as much as color. Shaylo, according to those who knew him, wasn't affiliated with any group, but he was close with people who were, especially his friend Che Patasi, better known as Shay, who had long-standing connections to a local crew in Carson that had been active in South Bay for years. The streets don't ask for signed-up paperwork, they just look at who you move with, what you say, where you show up, and sometimes even how you carry yourself. So once folks start spotting you near certain cars, certain people, or on certain blocks, you end up wearing their colors whether you asked for it or not. The tension between certain neighborhood groups in Carson and Harbor City wasn't new. It runs deep, going back to older sets and older shootings that turned into family feuds. And even though Carson and Harbor City sit right next to each other on the map, the tension between them feels like a wall. Shaylo's family started noticing he was getting a little too familiar with some neighborhood names that came with red flags. And while nobody in that house wanted to believe their boy was caught up, they also knew that proximity alone could turn someone from civilian to target in a second. Living in Torrance kept them technically out of the way, but all it took was a couple of friends on the wrong side of Western Avenue, and suddenly you weren't just visiting a lounge, you were stepping into a highly sensitive area. It was Wednesday, March the 5th, 2014, just another cool night in Harbor City, and Shaylo had plans to kick it with his boys, Shay and Miles Majeo. Nothing major, just a link up at a hookah lounge posted up near Western Avenue and 259th Street. They were sitting on Crip turf without even knowing how hot the block could get, especially when you pulled in from Carson repping red, even just by association. Before hitting the lounge, the three of them made a stop at a nearby gas station around 9:20 p.m., just trying to grab snacks or gas up, but things shifted real quick when they encountered three individuals with known ties to a local group in Harbor City and already known to local law enforcement. According to later court records and testimony, Allen was the first to approach and asked, "Where are you from?" A question that, in certain neighborhoods, isn't just small talk, but can be seen as a challenge or even a threat. Shay answered back with, "Westside Carson, Peru." And that moment lit the fuse, because mentioning that name in a rival neighborhood is seen as a serious provocation. Allen and the other two responded with their own set name, dropping curses and disses to show it wasn't love. And from that point on, it wasn't just tension, it was beef waiting to spill over. The three friends left that gas station without any hands thrown. No real scuffle, but it wasn't over, because street beef doesn't die in words. It just waits until the moment is right. They rolled back to the lounge and parked in the lot near the strip center where the spot was located, figuring the moment had passed, but they were wrong because somebody had followed. Around 9:40 p.m., Just 20 minutes after the gas station face-off, a man approached their car and without warning, opened fire, discharging multiple rounds directly into the vehicle. Witnesses reported hearing multiple gunshots, and by the time the shooter tucked his piece and disappeared into a nearby alley, the damage was already done. Shaylo had been hit in the torso and he was critically wounded before he even had a chance to react, while Shay got clipped in multiple spots but managed to stay alive, and Miles somehow walked away untouched, still breathing but clearly shaken. Paramedics pulled up quickly and tried to stabilize both injured men, but Shaylo's wound was too severe, and by 10:22 p.m., at the hospital, he was officially pronounced dead. That's how fast it happened. 20 minutes between laughing with your boys and lying cold on a stretcher, with your whole future leaking out in a place you probably shouldn't have been to begin with. The shooter was gone. No names at the time, no cameras catching faces, just bullet casings on the ground, sirens in the background, and a basketball prodigy from the South Bay, now remembered as another heartbreaking loss in a community deeply affected by violence. When the news reached the Lifa house that night, everything froze, like the air got ripped out of the room and the world stopped spinning for a second. And from that moment on, nothing ever really felt normal again. Shiloh's parents, Filippo and Nese, had to walk into a hospital room and identify their son's body. And when they saw him laid out like that, cold and still, it broke something deep inside them that words couldn't fix. His siblings were in disbelief, especially his older brother, who kept saying maybe there was some mistake. Maybe he was just injured. Maybe he would wake up, but none of that happened. And by morning, reality settled in like a storm cloud over the whole family. His girlfriend, Lauren Dodd, was shattered. She said later that Shaylo had only just turned 21, and they had plans, real ones, the kind you don't share with everybody because they're too sacred, and now those dreams were just gone. The family didn't sit in silence, though. They pushed hard for justice, printing flyers, holding candlelight vigils, and hosting prayer nights at the First Samoan Congregational Church in Harbor City, with pastors, cousins, and neighbors filling the pews. They even paid out of pocket to put up a massive billboard along Pacific Coast Highway, offering a $5,000 reward for any info that would lead to an arrest. And that billboard stayed up for months, with Shaylo's photo and the words "Justice for Shaylo" watching every car that passed. At Narbonne High, his former teammates wore warm-up shirts with his number 24 on the back, and every win that season felt like a tribute to the brother they lost. But outside the family and close friends, the buzz faded fast. Media covered it for a few days, maybe a week, then moved on to the next headline, the next body, because in LA, one more young man killed in street-related violence barely makes headlines. Only this time, the family didn't let it get swept away. Despite all the grief and all the noise, the case went cold fast, and that made it hurt even more because nobody wanted to talk. People were afraid to speak out, knowing it could have serious consequences. The detectives on the case worked it hard in the beginning, pulling up at the gas station and hookah lounge to collect whatever footage they could. But the angles were bad, the cameras too grainy, and nobody on that block was rushing to say a word. In communities like that, silence isn't always about loyalty. Sometimes it comes from fear. And when people remember everything but forgiveness is rare, many choose to stay quiet rather than put themselves at risk. The LAPD canvassed the neighborhood multiple times, asked questions, knocked on doors, followed leads that went nowhere, and still nothing stuck. Because without eyewitnesses or a license plate, it was just another homicide file in a city full of them. Harbor City had its own reasons not to cooperate, built on decades of tension with the police, who were known more for kicking doors and tossing handcuffs than building trust. And even those who weren't part of the life didn't want to be seen as betraying the community. Shaylo's family kept pushing, though. They stayed in the streets, kept passing out flyers, revisited every person they thought might have seen something, and kept showing up at the precinct, asking for updates, asking for action, just asking not to be forgotten. For 2 whole years, they moved like that, quietly loud, always present, always grieving, always hoping that somebody, somewhere, would finally crack and say something real. But until that day came, all they had was the billboard, the candles, and the memory of a boy who had only just begun to live. For 2 years, the street stayed quiet, and the case sat on ice, with detectives stuck chasing shadows until something unexpected came through the phone line in 2016, a call that broke the silence and flipped everything around. The tip came from someone nobody expected, a young woman, the ex-girlfriend of Jasper Ferguson, who dropped names that matched what the family had always feared but never could prove. She told detectives that Jasper had admitted to her that he was there that night, and so were his cousins, David Lee Allen and Khalif Azen Ferguson, all three connected to the Harbor City Crips and now officially on the radar. The story she told lined up with what the police already had: 3 suspects, a known group, a tense confrontation, and a fatal shooting. But up until that point, nobody on record had ever said it out loud. Once that tip dropped, detectives moved fast. They picked up David Allen first, and instead of going straight for the interrogation room, they played it smarter. They planted an undercover police agent in his jail cell to see what might slip when he didn't know he was being watched. And Allen slipped when he started talking like he had something to prove, bragging that he'd been doing this for 12 years, and that the Harbor City hit was fun, like it was just another mission, another day in the life of someone who thought he couldn't be touched. He talked about the gun jamming that night, blaming it on a busted firing pin, and said they dumped their pistols near a trash can after the shots were fired. He didn't know that every word was being recorded. The detectives pulled the area around the lounge again and found shell casings that matched the ballistics from one of the recovered guns, and that was the nail they needed. By April 28, 2016, both David Allen and Khalif Ferguson were in custody, and less than a week later, on May 3rd, police tracked down Jasper Ferguson too. All 3 were formally charged in connection with the fatal incident involving Shaylo Lifa, as well as the injuries sustained by Che Patasi and the shots fired at Miles Maggio. Khalif also faced an additional weapons-related charge due to a prior conviction. For the Lifa family, that moment felt like a breakthrough, like maybe finally some kind of justice was coming. But justice doesn't always move clean or fast, and once the charges were filed, the case entered a long, slow grind through the LA court system, one where truth has to be proven a dozen different ways just to stick. The first trial didn't start until late 2017, and by then, memories had already started to fade. Evidence was being picked apart, and key witnesses were hard to lock in. Che Patasi took the stand, but when it came time to name names, his memory got hazy. Maybe it was fear, maybe trauma, maybe both, but his testimony didn't land the way prosecutors needed it to. The defense pounced on every inconsistency, and the jury, unsure of who had done what exactly, couldn't come to a decision. The case ended in a mistrial, and just like that, the whole thing had to be refiled and started again from scratch. The DA's office stayed on it though, and by 2022, they brought the case back, determined not to let it slip through again. But this time around, things played out different. Faced with the weight of the evidence, including the jailhouse recordings, the ballistic matches, and the growing risk of a life sentence, Khalif and Jasper made their move first. They both agreed to plea deals, copping to voluntary manslaughter instead of murder. Each of them took 19 years in state prison, a sentence that didn't sit right with everybody, but was seen by prosecutors as better than another possible hung jury. That left David Allen as the last man standing, and he wasn't trying to fold. He pushed forward with a full trial, betting that maybe the jury would see enough holes in the story to let him walk. But the state came prepared. They brought in the jailhouse tapes where Allen bragged that the shooting was fun and casually described tossing the weapon like it was nothing, and they backed it with forensic evidence from the crime scene. Experts were brought in to explain how phrases like "where you from" and certain colors worn that night weren't random. They carried heavy meaning and were seen as challenges rooted in long-standing neighborhood tensions. The jury listened to all of it, and when it came time to deliberate, they didn't take long to decide. David Lee Allen was found guilty of first-degree murder for killing Shaylo Lifa and 2 counts of attempted murder for the shots aimed at Shay and Miles. At his sentencing hearing in 2023, the judge didn't hold back, calling Allen's comments about the shooting being fun, not only egregious, but evidence of a total lack of remorse. And she hit him with a 45 to life sentence, stacking the attempted murder time on top. Allen's lawyers filed an appeal, arguing that the jailhouse recordings shouldn't have been allowed because Allen had previously invoked his right to remain silent. But in 2024, the California 2nd District Court of Appeals shot that down. The panel ruled that Allen's rights weren't violated and that the evidence against him was overwhelming, enough to keep him behind bars for the rest of his natural life. For Shaylo's family, that verdict didn't bring their son back, but it brought something else, a small piece of closure in a case where silence almost won. After the courtroom lights dimmed and the verdicts came in, the city kept moving like it always does. But for the Leifa family, the world still felt like it had a piece missing, because no matter how many years they gave those boys, nothing was ever bringing Shaylo back. The question on everybody's mind stayed the same. Why did it happen? Why did a South Bay hooper with no violent history end up getting gunned down in Harbor City over a 20-second set claim that wasn't even his? To understand that, you have to understand how the lines work in that part of LA. Carson Pyru sets and Harbor City Crips have been feuding since way back. And even though both neighborhoods sit less than 15 minutes apart, they might as well be on different planets when it comes to gang politics. Shaylo wasn't an active banger, but his boy Shay was tapped in with Westside Carson Pyru, a blood-aligned set made up mostly of Samoan kids trying to hold their block in a city that didn't always give them space to breathe. Just being seen with the wrong crew in the wrong zip code was enough to get you pressed. And once that "where you from" question got asked, there wasn't much wiggle room to walk away clean. Harbor City Crips saw Carson red and acted accordingly, not caring whether Shaylo was just a ball player or just caught in the middle. Che Patasi, who lived through the shooting, struggled with survivors' guilt and trauma for years. His body healed up, but his sleep never did. He said he couldn't walk into a crowd without scanning for exits, couldn't ride past Western Avenue without replaying the gunshots in his head. Shaylo's siblings were just as stuck, wondering if they could have convinced him to stay at Harbor College, wondering if they should have pushed him harder to stay focused on basketball, wondering how someone with so much love, talent, and structure still ended up on a memorial flyer. But his legacy didn't just stop at loss. Narbonne High set up a scholarship in his name, giving student athletes from South Bay a shot to stay on track, especially those balancing family duties, academic stress, and the pull of the streets. His coaches at Fresno City still talk about him to new recruits, using his story as both inspiration and a warning, a reminder that the game can give you structure, but it can't always protect you from what waits off the court. Beyond the personal impact, Shaylo's death cracked open a conversation that a lot of Samoan families had been avoiding, about how gang culture moved through their communities and how being silent about it wasn't keeping anybody safe. Groups like the FOU movement, started by ex-gang members from Long Beach and Carson, started gaining traction, using their own stories to reach kids who looked just like they used to, trying to flip the narrative before another funeral got planned. FOU members like Upu, who served over 2 decades behind bars, started showing up at high schools and church halls, telling younger Samoans that real strength wasn't about what set you claimed, but about what future you built. And they reminded folks that many young people in these neighborhoods were at risk of being drawn into group conflicts by default. These programs leaned on faith, community service, mentorship, and cultural pride to pull kids back from the edge, because at the core, the issue wasn't just about neighborhood divisions. It was about poverty, broken systems, and the lack of safe spaces for boys like Shaylo, who sat somewhere between athlete, brother, and potential target. Meanwhile, Shaylo's parents, especially his mother Nizi, kept showing up at community events, holding his photo and speaking to any crowd that would listen, saying his name with the kind of love that refuses to let death get the last word. His girlfriend Lauren spoke in court during the sentencing and again during a school panel years later, telling students that Shaylo was only 21 years old for 21 days. And if that line didn't hit your chest like a brick, then maybe you didn't understand how short life really is when the streets make the rules. The lessons from his death go beyond gang beefs or territory, because they point to how easy it is to lose someone good in a city that makes it hard to stay clean, how fast loyalty can get mistaken for affiliation, and how invisible boundaries can take visible lives. Shaylo didn't go out holding a weapon or trying to prove a point. He just got caught on the wrong block with the wrong people during the wrong moment, and that was all it took. Now, every year on March 5th, his people pull up to that same parking lot where it all ended, lighting candles, playing his favorite songs, and saying prayers that the next generation figures out a better way to move. Because for them, Shaylo wasn't just a name or a headline. He was a brother, a son, a teammate, and a light. And even now, his story still echoes in every sneaker that squeaks on a South Bay gym floor.